Good afternoon and warm welcome to everybody for today's webinar on closing the CFO talent gap. I am Ross Woledge, head of the CFO practice at Odgers Berndtson, and today we're going to be exploring some of the results from our recently published CFO study, but more importantly we're going to be looking at what this means for the CFO role today and what we might anticipate could happen with the function in the future. I am delighted to be joined by two highly respected CFOs today. Mandeep Chawla is Chief Financial Officer of Celestica Inc., a multi-billion-dollar technology design, manufacturing, supply chain solutions organization with a significant global presence. Mandeep is also the audit chair of Sleep Country Canada. Next is Madhu Ranganathan, who is the Chief Financial Officer of OpenText, which is Canada's largest software company and has revenues of over $3 billion. Madhu also serves on the board of BMO Financial Group and Akamai. Before we begin, some initial ground rules. Firstly, all mics will be muted and videos will be off. Should you have a question for the panel, please send it through the Q&A function and we'll do our best to answer. Finally, as an FYI, we are recording this session, so if you're unable to stay until the end or you had a colleague you'd like to share this with, we will send a link following the completion of the webinar. So with that out of the way, Madhu, Mandeep, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you, Ross, for having us.
Very good. Well, so perhaps we'll start off with just a quick synopsis from you both on your career journeys. And secondly, if you could point towards any of those sort of career decisions you made that really helped to accelerate your development on the path to your current CFO roles. Madhu, would you like to kick off?
Oh, sure thing, I can. Thank you again, Ross, and to your firm for having me. And again, the presence of Mandeep and the great audience here is so much appreciated. So for me, I'm going to date myself. I was born and raised in Chennai in India. I have been in the United States for over 30 years. My education and primarily the accounting side, I'm a chartered accountant, cost accountant from India. I passed the CPA in the US, and I also got my MBA from the University of Massachusetts. So my career really started off in the US, on the East Coast in financial services for about 6 years. And then I headed west, and I have over 20 years of Silicon Valley experience, primarily technology. In my experience, hardware, software, SaaS companies, services companies, etc. And now I've been CFO at OpenText, as you mentioned, Canada's largest software company, for 3 years. I would say though that the Silicon Valley experience and technology company experience in particular, I'm very grateful for. It's like a powerhouse of learning and working with some of the smartest people in the industry. And it really shaped and molded sort of who I am as a professional and certainly who I am as a CFO. In terms of career decisions, I would say it's not a single one. It's a series of decisions, right? Do you decide to work in a software company? Do you pivot to a hardware company? Do you rise on the path of the controllership to CFO? That was really my path. Do you work for a startup taking it public? Do you work for a scale company? So I would say there was a series of decisions, and at every point, I can tell you, I was very much supported by my colleagues, whether it's board members or my mentors. I've always established great relationship with CEOs I worked with and then moved on, right? So again, it was a series of career decisions and well supported by the community of professionals I worked with as well.
Fabulous. Thank you, Madhu, for that overview. Mandeep, please go ahead.
Yeah, so again, I want to echo Madhu's comments and say thanks very much for having us here. Really looking forward to the conversation. For myself, maybe I'll go back to the beginning where I went to university at McMaster University. I did a commerce degree there. And then coming out of school, I joined GE. I spent my first 8 years of my career at GE. And when I joined General Electric, I went into their financial management program, which was a 2-year rotational program across different businesses, got a bunch of learning along the way as well. I then, for the next about 2.5 years, joined this group called the Corporate Audit Staff. And essentially, I was working for GE's head office out of Connecticut. But for the next 2.5 years, I was traveling 100% of the time, working various assignments, whether it's controllership or M&A, FP&A, risk management type of activities. But I was working in a lot of different locations. So I was working in the US, I worked in Canada, I worked in Europe, I worked in Asia as well. And that really was probably my most defining moment of my career, if I can. It was a very high intensity, high stakes assignment, working probably about 100 hours a week consistently for 2.5 years. Exposure to a good level of senior executives across various business units, across various functions, and really just having an opportunity to watch very successful people and how they run business and the things that they expect for the people that they're working with. And again, for myself, that was a very defining moment, I think, in my career development. I left GE in 2007. I did a couple of stints along the way, but I ended up joining Celestica in 2010. So I've been now at Celestica for the last 11 years. For those who don't know much about Celestica, we're about $6 billion in revenue. We're headquartered in Canada, but we're really a global company. We're in 14 different countries, 25,000 employees. We work in various end markets, everywhere from aerospace and defense and medical to building out data centers. And so what the company has allowed me to do is really get immersed in various types of business and seeing a great level of customers across the Fortune 100. I've been CFO now since 2017. I've done a variety of roles before that at Celestica, mostly in the FP&A side and the business partnership side. And I know we'll talk about that throughout our conversation, but they've really served me well since I've now been in this role for the last 4 years.
Fabulous. Thank you. So let's just talk a little bit about the role of the CFO. So as we said in the study, but anecdotally, we can all speak to this, the CFO is migrating away from just purely a finance role to overseeing a wide disparate group of functions. So Mandeep, maybe could you describe a little bit about your role today and maybe some of the rationale behind why you're overseeing certain functions outside of finance?
Sure. Yeah, so when I started off, it was finance. I was responsible for all things from one end to the other. Investor relations was included in that. In some organizations, investor relations are not included in the CFO's mandate. It is in Celestica's, and it always has been. But very quickly after that, my role started taking on other types of responsibilities. So if you look at what I'm responsible for today, in addition to finance, including IR, I also oversee corporate development, so mergers and acquisitions, the legal organization, which includes sustainability, and the communications organization as well. Sorry, Russ. So if I talk about, some of the reasons why, it's going to be different for every organization. But if I look at Celestica specifically, we really don't operate in silos amongst the executive leadership team. So there's the CEO of the company, Rob Mionis, and 4 or 5 individuals who make up the rest of the ELT. And frankly, what we are looking to do is take the responsibilities of the company and divide it up amongst ourselves because we work so collaboratively together. And when looking at, what should fall under Mandeep, it's how can we start to drive synergies across the organizations? Because, even though I'm the numbers guy for the company, I'm actually as much a business executive working alongside my other, leadership team members. And so if I'm going to be overseeing a couple of things, is there really a benefit of putting the two together and maybe drive some level of work synergies? But there's another part of it as well, which is how do you continue to develop the individual that's in the role? Before someone gets to the CFO job, often they would be in a job for a maximum of 2 to 3 years. And so for the duration of their career, they keep on moving around. Then you get to the CFO job, and all of a sudden you're being asked to stay in a role for 4, 5, 6 years, which is unusual for that person in their career development. And so for myself, 18 months, 2 years into the role, a natural conversation was to say, hey, is there anything else that I can help the company out with? And so it's a natural evolution because of that.
Fantastic, excellent. Madhu, you've got a slightly different portfolio, but could you just explain that and maybe some of the rationale behind it?
Sure thing. I'll probably talk about in three different aspects, right? One is when we talk about traditional CFO roles, and my career spans over 3 decades. So each decade has evolved in a different way. So I don't even use the word traditional anymore. It's how is the CFO role evolving with the needs of each decade, right? So when you think about it, the traditional controllership to a very systems-oriented finance role, we had to have ERP in, we had to have ERP connected, and then I would say there was a lot of emphasis on business finance. Where I sit at OpenText, it's a pretty broad portfolio. I'll speak about traditional finance first, which is CAO office, treasury. CAO office includes tax. Of course, FP&A is very, very critical. And we have something called shared services. We call it digital business services. That is all of the transaction-oriented functions that sits AR, AP, billing, collections into one unit. Then we go into investor relations. I completely agree with Mandeep. Investor relations is part of the CFO org. I think matrix reporting is something everyone has to embrace. For example, investor relations works very closely with the legal organization, very closely with the CEO. The CEO has a vested interest for whatever is important to the investor community. And then I also have the internal audit function, which again is a very solid matrix reporting to the audit committee chair, which is the way it should be. And this is more functional. I also have the CIO organization under the CFO umbrella, and that is the next evolution. And I think you're going to see more of that, because of the need for automation, end-to-end business process, all of that, right? And we'll talk more. I think CFOs also bring a unique ability. I'm sure Mandeep will agree. Being in technology software companies, I say this: we don't build product, we don't code, we don't sell, but anything in between. We have a clear perspective on that, right? And then it comes to which ones do you want to own and control? Which ones do you want to be consultative, advisory, very close? And which ones do you want to influence, right? But we sort of bear the stake across that spectrum. I'm actually very excited about what the next few decades could hold, not for myself, but for the other aspiring leaders out there, because it is definitely going to converge into business finance. It's going to converge into systems and automation, but never forget the importance of accounting and controllership and taxes as a very strong foundation.
Yeah, that's excellent. And did you ever meet any resistance? Because maybe the CIO doesn't necessarily want to, report to the CFO. Maybe different parts of the organization want to report into the CEO. Was there ever any of that conversation you had?
If they were very collaborative and cooperative. And here's sort of the phrase I've used. I say that I'm not a technology expert. I don't look to lead the technology organization. I want the technology organization to lead me, right? But I have an insatiable appetite for technology.
Yeah.
So let's work together, right? And I do think that's what represents, especially given COVID and coming out of it, the synergy there can be quite powerful. But I think in every role, right, I'm sure Mandeep will agree on this as well, is you have to have confidence and rely and trust the experts, right? Where our role comes in is the partnership and the leadership, and perhaps the financial envelope as well. But that's really been my driving philosophy, even within my pillars, whether it's tax or CAO. You hire strong people and you really trust them, right? And then becomes a partnership. I'm sort of extending my response, if you don't mind. I really don't look at somebody reporting into me, somebody working for me at the end of the day. It's about we're all partners in here, and we've chosen for some umbrella leadership, right? I mean, I think that's a very, very important factor across the organization.
Very good. Thank you, Madhu. Mandeep, sustainability, ESG, I guess, a hot topic today. It wasn't always the case, but you've had that sort of reporting into you for some time. Can you tell us a little bit about, what's happening in that world? Where's it going? And, who needs to own it? Because, again, we're getting a lot of, noise around ESG and driving that as really core part of the strategic agenda.
Yeah, Ross. So, on environmental, social, and governance, which is what it is, it's taken on a lot more of a prominent role, I think, within companies over the last 4 or 5 years, and that's a very good thing. Many companies, Celestica included, have been very much focused on these areas, but behind the scenes, not necessarily packaging it together as ESG. So for companies that already have this ingrained in what they do, it's been a bit of a packaging exercise to let people know that, look, there are things that we do, and you need to be aware of that. In other companies, maybe they need to accelerate their journey. For Celestica, we're a technology hardware builder, and we also make industrial type products. Our ESG journey actually started probably 15, 20 years ago, where in partnership with our customers wanted to know that we had a strong ESG mandate. So we've always been very strong, I'd say, on the environmental side, and it's very much ingrained in the management systems that we have across the company and in each of what our factories do. We have over 35 locations across the company. The governance side is again critical. Often people take it for granted, but well-run companies are very strong on the governance side, and that starts from the board all the way down. And again, an area that's been strong for ourselves. Social is the area I would say over the last 12 to 18 months that has really taken the most, is the biggest area of focus for many companies. It includes things such as diversity and inclusion, and how do you, again, build that into the fabric of the company. In terms of the ownership, I would say no one group, quote unquote, owns ESG. It needs to be what you do as a company, and good companies have good ESG programs. It needs to be integrated into everything that you do. Now, the CFO role is a natural one because CFOs are often tasked with ensuring that the company's management systems are working and that we are talking about the right things when leaders are getting together. And so ESG can naturally fall under that. But frankly, if ESG fell under the leadership of the chief operating officer, that would make a lot of sense. Under the leadership of your CHRO, your head of HR, that can actually make sense as well. Because what I find is it doesn't matter who, quote unquote, owns it, everyone has a stake in it. And so there's multiple people who are providing their guidance and their advice on how to make the function stronger.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. Madhu, it doesn't report to you, but you're obviously engaged heavily in it. Could you just share a little bit about OpenText, their approach, and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll borrow from Mandeep. The integrated framework of ESG is absolutely critical. At OpenText, ESG functionally owned by our chief legal office, but investor relations that reports into the CFO. Every investor, if you're a public company globally, has that ESG checklist up there and very focused on it. So our investor relations team, I would say, co-leads the ESG framework along with the chief legal office and the constituents. Like we have a lot of data centers, right? So the cloud infrastructure team is in there. So is the HR team. So similar to what Mandeep represented here, the integrated framework is absolutely critical, but it's technically owned by the chief legal office, but a very strong participation and co-leadership from investor relations.
And are you finding more investors, or there's a lot more investor scrutiny, so you're going to have to sort of, as a CFO, if you're not experiencing it now, it's probably coming?
I see it already happening, Ross, in the sense that every bank, financial institution, money manager, they have the resources to do their own ESG research, right? And they are very much on top of it. We saw this coming even pre-COVID, and then it just took a sort of a very high velocity turn. So we had to deploy resources, and I would say not every company is caught up with how the thousands of institutions look at it, but it's very much top of their minds.
Yeah. Yesterday when we were chatting, we talked a little bit about the intersection between finance and business strategy, and Madhu, I think you said quite rightly, it's never been more integrated. Yeah. And yet, Mandeep, conversely, you said still you need to get fundamentals right. If you don't get those right, you lose all credibility. So as a CFO, how do you balance that sort of, chief accounting office, the compliance controls with that more strategic function? And how do you set the team up?
And do you want to go, Mandeep, or I can?
Please start.
Okay, I'll do that. Look, I will speak for myself first. As I said, my upbringing educationally was in accounting, chartered accountant, cost accountant. Once an accountant, always an accountant, right? And then that's the foundation. That's my personal inner foundation. So what that also drives is I've grown, experienced to really understand the intricacies of accounting, tax, and all related matters. So as I grew in my career, it was imperative that the controllership function, no matter the size of the organization, was going to be one of the finest running engines out there with strong leadership, strong support, staffing systems, and so on. As a CFO, as you grow into other areas of business finance, that is fundamental. You have to ensure that. Am I going in and doing general ledger coding? No, I'm not. But do we have a team that keeps it running? That engine is measured by how quiet and smooth and efficient it is. It is not measured by the noise it makes. We don't want noise. The business finance world is really measured by the noise it makes, right? By the conversations they have, by the interactions they have, by the results they produce, data insights. So owning all of that, especially for aspiring CFOs, I would say that it starts with your mindset. You have to really like and enjoy the business model, the business side of the CFO house, because at the end of the day, when the CEO comes into your office and talks to you, it is about how do we model this? How do we grow here? What's the financial envelope here? It is a lot less about what's happening in the technical accounting matters, even though they're very, very important. So no questions on the importance of the accounting function and the accounting foundation. I'm actually very grateful. I'm an accounting driven, grew up in the accounting world to be CFO and not without it, because without it, I would definitely see it as a handicap. I'll just make one other comment. I'm sure you say the same thing, Mandeep. I can look at the balance sheet and I can read right through it. I can just visualize the journal entries that go left and right? That's how I still look at analytics. So it's a very, very strong requirement. But as you advance into the business model, where do you add value? Which conversations with the board, with the CEO, with the management team? It is going to be about running the business. So you have to have affinity towards that and start building strong teams and sort of systems for that as well. That's how I would describe it.
Mandeep, how about yourself? How do you view this topic?
Madhu had a great answer, and I'm going to maybe build on it a little bit. You know, the conversations around business partnership and strategy have been in vogue, if you will, for the last 10 plus years. But I think sometimes what is forgotten is that the core responsibility of a CFO and of the finance organization is the accounting and controllership side of the company. Nobody owns it but you. At the end of the day. And so what I think sometimes can be taken for granted or maybe not fully appreciated is you have to have a very strong technical side in your organization running really well in order to have even the permission to be a business partner. If you don't have a very robust tax organization, accounting organization, controls that are right exactly where they need to be, you frankly shouldn't be involved on the business partnership side because you got to get your own shop in order. But once you have your shop in order and it's staffed with very capable executives who are very deep in those areas, that's where you can then now say, okay, well, if that's running the way it should run, let me go and see how I can partner with the rest of the business to really drive the agenda forward. And if you go and you interface with executives throughout the company, there actually is a thirst to partner with finance. Not because of the accounting side of things. I mean, they just expect that you're going to take care of those things. It's, hey, can you partner with me to help make the right decision? Because I know at the end of the day, it's going to turn into dollars and cents. And I want to make sure that I'm looking at this the right way. And if you're willing to give them your time, they will almost certainly take you along, the journey. And so what I would say is that it's a wonderful evolution that's been happening within finance over the last 10 or 15 years. Where there is now a very concentrated focus on how can you partner with the business. But again, I just go back to my early comment, which is it's actually a step within the journey. You first have to get through the basic blocking and tackling before you can even get there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes, and we see it where and again, I'm sure you move your finance team around, but you'll be an exceptional chief accounting officer. And then you want to move into the business side. And because you're such a good chief accounting officer, no one wants to move you away from that role. So is there a view on that? And how do you sort of develop your team?
Maybe I'll start with the answer on that one. Look, my view on it is that we always have to be ready for succession, and that nobody is going to be in their role forever. If they want to be in their role forever and they're fantastic at it, then that's great, and we'll support you on that. But if you have been, really hitting the ball out of the park, it's just natural to expect that you're going to one day want to do something else and want to develop in other areas. And so it's not fair to that individual. It's not fair to the company to expect that people, once they do a really good job, they're not going to move. And so I think it's just critical to always be thinking, especially for your senior leaders. If you think about the vice president level roles within a large global organization, you're going to have, every company's different. Let's call it 5-7 vice presidents of finance. You always need to be thinking that person who came into that role may stay only in that role for 3 years, may stay in that role for 8 years. But if it's 3 years, do we have the person who's going to backfill them ready to go? And then how about the person behind that? And so succession planning is a very important part of the job.
Great answer. Madhu, anything to add to that? Do you like to move your team around?
Yeah. No, 100% agree. In fact, I hope the audience appreciates that Mandeep and I are intertwined on the view that accounting as a foundation is equally attractive as FP&A. It's really important. Never forget it, right? I think we're very intertwined on that. And thank you again, Mandeep. I would say this. I think you made a comment, Ross. You don't wake up one day as a CAO, say, I want to be CFO. It never works. If I look back in my career, even when I was an audit associate at Pricewaterhouse, you're going and auditing companies. I was really genuinely interested in the business of the company, but I never forgot the accounting matters of what needs to be done and ticked and tied off. So I think you have to soul search yourself. Do you really enjoy, do you want to understand the business side? In my all hands, I ask accounting managers, directors of accounting, accounting supervisors, what does OpenText do? Do you understand our content management software? Right? So I think the accounting side, by virtue of what they do and the personalities, we tend to be in the world of accounting. So I think you start demonstrating early on in your career, it's never too late. Start understanding the business side. It is not just a fine balance. It's a right balance between, if you're a CAO who's a great CAO, but you've always expressed understanding and support of the business in that very fine, right way, and you have a great succession plan, of course you'd be considered for the CFO role. So I think it's really that it has to grow in you, your love for the business and understanding the products, the markets of the company, et cetera. It really has to grow on you, and you never lose your foundational experience.
That's a great point. So in terms of that sort of curiosity, so you say it's, naturally curious, you're really, passionate about business. Mandeep, is there any other sort of characteristics you look for in your team and potential succession plan? And, is there anything you sort of look to develop?
What I would say, Ross, is that by the time I'm thinking about you as a potential CFO successor, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 7 years down the road, you already would have had the boxes checked on the technical side. That's just a given. If you're still developing your technical attributes 5 years away from wanting to be a public company CFO, one of us is making the wrong decision. So that's already a given. So then by the time you're within that 5-year window of trying to become the CFO, it's really about the business partnership side. Do you understand how business works? Are you a trusted partner to business unit presidents, or to general managers, or to the sales team, or to the operations staff? Like, do they naturally seek you out? Are you able to understand what will make the company successful, obviously from a lens of a financial lens, but as just any other business executive would? And so then it's really about rounding out those experiences. And there are certain roles that give you more access to those experiences than others. A business unit CFO job will often do that. And so that's a great way of doing it. FP&A is a great path as well, because you often are going to be working on all of the material that goes to the board of directors. You're going to be facilitating the strategic planning process. You're going to be facilitating the annual operating planning process, which interfaces with all of the various functions. So when you get to that last couple of miles of the journey, you want to make sure that you're getting very relevant experience, because the technical should be taken care of already.
So
Ross,
oh, please, yeah.
Yes, sorry, if you don't mind, you asked a question about growth in the team, and I just wanted to address that.
Please.
We have built a very robust growth plan, right? We really believe in growth. I call the grassroots. We have over 700 people in the global finance organization. So foundationally, do you want to become more of an expert in what you do? We've really started to emphasize tools and techniques you need and applications. So very randomly, if you want to go take a data science course or a machine learning course, it's open to you. We're thinking about the future, right? And like Mandeep said, cross-functional skills that you need. As you go up, we're really emphasizing, and we've worked with the Rotman School and other sort of organizations, leadership, right? Even if you're a manager of 5 people, you're still a leader. So trying to provide those types of growth opportunities. And to round out on the controllership versus FP&A, I think it's old-fashioned hard work. If you're really interested in the CFO path, you've got to put in old-fashioned hard work to attend a product webinar, to attend a marketing webinar, and spend some time understanding about the business. And then there's a softer skill, which is how do you speak to the business without telling them what to do, but by doing your homework on understanding their world. That is that fine balance, right? And it's just old-fashioned hard work. You have to keep working at it.
So that's a great point. So, and I think, Mandeep, you said pretty much the same. If you'll really get in, learn the business, be able to really understand it at a grassroots level, the business will respect you for that, and you'll be able to add more value without necessarily coming across as telling them what to do.
Yeah,
that's right. And I'll give you an example, Ross, of when you know it's working well. It's working well when there are people on my finance team who are not only on my succession plan, but they're also on the succession plan for business unit presidents. When I have the CEO or the CHRO coming to me and say, hey, by the way, do you think so-and-so could be on not only your succession plan, but these other individuals as well? You know that person is not seen as a finance person anymore, but as a business executive. And it's a great testimony to their progress.
And if you are more in that chief accounting officer role, is there opportunities to get in front of the business more, like an ERP implementation, things like that? Is that, can you still be business facing in that chief accounting officer role?
I would say it's a must. And case in point, at OpenText, when the ERP was rolled out, it was led by the chief accounting officer on behalf of the CFO, as well as the CIO office, right? And today in our organization, in my organization, the chief accounting officer owns the digital roadmap for the CFO organization, right? So the seniority, the experience of the individual really helps. And again, be an enabler, right? I mean, our world has changed. We can be introverted, but we have to be an enabler. So to your point, cross-functional discussions about processes and how do you systematize the processes. And I mean, it can rest in the FP&A organization or the CAO, but in our case, we decided to do it. So definitely opportunities are there, Ross.
Yeah. And often you'll cater to the talent that you have. And so I'll give an example. The controller for Celestica is also the business partner to the operations organization. Of the 25,000 employees in Celestica, 20,000 fall under the operations organization. But our controller, who's incredibly strong accounting and technically, is also seen as a thought leader in that area. And that's because of her talent and her interests. One day when she decides to move on to better things, I'm not going to necessarily believe that the next controller is going to want that same mandate. You cater it a little bit to the individual.
Yeah, actually, Mandeep brings up a very good point. In the hardware world, operations controller was seen as a trifecta of being strong in the numbers, having a strong understanding of operational processes, and being a very good sort of FP&A forecasting person, right? It was a great trifecta that we lost a little bit in the software SaaS world, but that thought came to mind as you were talking, Mandeep.
Very good. Moving on to the next topic, we've seen, and one of the more interesting data points out of the study, I think, was simply that there's been a real drop in CFO tenure. So, a very steep drop over the past 5 years. Outside of pesky headhunters calling you, do you think, how do you reflect on the sort of disruption, the pace of change? How do you feel more pressure as a CFO? Do you feel CFOs are under more pressure? Just curious, it's difficult to answer, but any sort of ideas you might have?
Yep, I can go first, Mandeep. CFOs have always been under pressure. I'm not going to dispute your stats, Ross, so I will take the stats. And look, I think, as I said, every decade, particularly in the most recent years, I think everyone would agree, you're doing 6 months worth of work in a month, you're doing 5 years of work in 2 years. And when you talk about acquisitions or taking a company public or growing a company 70%, I mean, there's a lot that goes on in every business. And in many, many instances, the pace of change, the pace of growth, it really comes into the CFO office. So definitely, I would say if a CFO tenure is 3 years, you're seeing, or 5 years more recently, I think there's a lot that gets done if you compare 50 years ago in those 3 years or 5 years than it was in the past. I also think in many instances, the growth of the CFO role into other areas has also been happening, right? And fast growth, high growth CFOs moving into, Mandeep mentioned, either chief operating officer roles, right? And in many younger companies, even CEO roles. And Tim Cook at Apple was previously an operating person who became CEO. So I think there are other reasons, but definitely high velocity of changes, very dynamic businesses. And of course, there's a lot of pressure on the CFO teams as well. I mean, like maybe I would add here saying, I think it's very important, if you can make it happen, for CFOs to pick companies, pick environments, pick CEOs, pick management teams where you actually have the support to grow your teams, right? To hire people. It really hurts me when CFOs say, gosh, I don't have the budget. I need 2 more. No. That's not where you go, like nickel and dime. Of course, you want every function to be productive and efficient and not have any sort of, free room out there. But I do think it's important for aspiring CFOs and others to pick the right environment in all of its attributes, right? I've been very fortunate to do that, and hence I want to share the comment.
I actually don't have much to add. I think that answer covered it. The only thing maybe I would emphasize is that it is a high pressure job. Everyone knows that, but it actually is also one of the most enjoyable jobs you can have. Being a CFO is, for myself, the best experience I've ever had and the most enjoyable work I've ever done in my career. And so it's worth it. The hard work and the pressure that comes with it is definitely worth it.
Brilliant. We've touched on digitization, automation. Maybe let's just go there next. CFOs increasingly involved in digitization, automation, machine learning. How critical is it that you're involved in those discussions, that you have a good level of depth of knowledge? And then separately, how are your organizations approaching some of these new tools? Are you experimenting? Are you using them in different ways, perhaps in finance, outside of finance? Madhu,
take it on, Mandeep, or?
No, please.
Okay. The challenges are great and the opportunities are great as well, but they're very imperative. And what I mean by that is even pre-COVID, we were always under pressure to close earlier. Can you do virtual closes? Can you get me this information before? Accuracy is table stakes, right? And you could have an acquisition, how fast do you integrate? Appetite is insatiable with CEOs and board members on what they need to look at. So you put all of that together, it's got to be only 3 things. It's people, process, systems. And we know from a people perspective, talent, the right talent shortage, hiring and retention, all of that is there. At OpenText, and I'm a personal firm believer in this, you don't talk about systems and digitization before you talk about process. So we literally have a process optimization team, and we have a system sort of digital team. If the head of system digital talks to me about process, I get very upset. I'm like, no, that's the process. And if the process person talks about digital, it's the same thing. So you have to have your processes in order. And there's plenty of things to be done. Even before the CIO organization has been part of the CFO organization, as I said, under the CIO, we do have a digital roadmap team in there. What do they do? A day in the life of, I'd say blank, blank, blank. A day in the life of an accountant, a day in the life of an analyst. If you're a director, if you're a VP of accounting, you're going to go there and spend a day in the life of the analyst, the day in the life of the accountant. You don't know how long it takes them to upload a file. You don't know how long it takes them to make an entry. So we make it very imperative for leaders to understand the day in the life of. Now, you bring back home your process learnings, what needs to be optimized, what needs to be improved. Yes, we do experiment, chatbots and so on, and then we make it real. The ERP integration to us is also very, very important. And we have a project management office that tracks about 100 projects. If it's complex enough, we try to simplify it. I try to stem down the enthusiasm. Don't keep adding projects. We have a roadmap for 12 months. Let's just get it done. And then we move on. Lastly, anyone in the organization can take, even if it's not directly related to their job today, a data science course, a machine learning course. We have speakers who come in, because what we want to do is to create that environment, the air around you, right? And so that when time comes for you to be part of a project, it's right there. So I'll pause. I'll hand it over to Mandeep.
No, I love going after Madhu because she covers what I want to cover, and then I get to build on it. Look, what I would say on this is there's been a lot of conversation around digitizing finance and other areas for many, many years. Frankly, not a ton has been done. But I believe that the reason not a ton has been done is because of what was touched on, which is the vast majority of the work actually happens downstream before you get to the final digitization stage. Like as an example, I mean, I started my career in 1999. I think since 1999, I've been hearing about one day we're going to get rid of Excel. I haven't seen a viable solution that replaces Excel yet. And the reason is because when people finally get to wanting to replace Excel, what they end up realizing is you're going to get so much more benefit if you can have a common ERP system, or if you can at least put everything into a common data warehouse. Well, what if you have common processes across your various different groups on how they build a forecast? Those are what actually address 80% of the opportunity. And then finally digitizing that last piece, it's a nice to have, but that's not where you start. And so what I would say is I agree that the opportunity continues to be there. But I would say that I don't expect that the next decade is going to look that different than the previous decade. I do think, though, that people are really recognizing that if you don't set up things the right way from the beginning, or you're not always don't always have that luxury, or if you don't spend the time to streamline processes and to make sure that things are set up in a way to run efficiently with the right people on it, spending all your time and your money on digitization frankly won't get you very far. It'll just probably make you more frustrated.
Yeah, great, good answer. But it is possible to imagine a world in maybe 5-10 years time where the finance organization has condensed a little bit and maybe more of the transactional work is being taken away and the sort of more value added stuff is left behind. Is that fair, Madhu, to think that way? Or
actually very much so. Here's how we describe it. We'll speak about the finance organization for a moment, but it very much applies to the transaction organization. Non-linear growth of resources to linear growth of revenue. When I say resources, we mean people, process, systems, right? Also think about the talent we're going to be looking at. People can work from anywhere. People have choices, right? We have a serious, in my view, a skill set shortage, even within the CFO organization or IT organization. So to me, automation comes first. This is not about reducing the labor force. It is about having the labor force, I think Mandeep alluded to it, do more value added work. I'm sure we collect hundreds of millions of dollars every quarter. The collector would love to look at an insight predictability report, right? Staring at so that he or she can even achieve more in terms of their output and contribution. So how do you get there, right? So we firmly believe that automation and digitization is the future. It is the non-linear growth of resources to linear growth of revenue, that not just the G&A organization, but also transaction processing of all kinds. And that's where the opportunities lie, frankly, for companies like OpenText and cloud-based organizations.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you look at the use of technology to scale your organization, and to be able to drive productivity, there are areas that the opportunity is more acute than others. So if you look at a shared services organization where you have 50 or more people doing accounts payable or doing journal entries or doing accounts receivable, how do you automate some of that? How do you put RPA in so that, not so that you can necessarily cut 10 people out, but as the business continues to grow, you don't have to add 10 people just because the business went up by a certain percentage. And so how do you make that organization able to just continue to absorb more and more work? And I would say, you haven't asked this, Ross, but one of the big benefits of having a shared services organization is you can put the leadership in place who thinks about those things every single day.
Right.
If you take an accounts receivable or an accounts payable team and you put them under the chief accounting officer, or you put them under tax, it's a responsibility that they will make sure they take care of. But they're not thinking every single day on how do they drive productivity and how do they automate and how do they make sure that they're hitting certain levels of KPIs. By putting those things into an organization where people think about that every single day, then you really start to see traction. And that's probably one of the great things about having these common types of activities into a shared services group.
Yeah.
Very good. Gonna ask one more question, and then I think we'll take some questions from our participants. But talking about the relationship with the audit chair and the CFO, obviously a very, very critical relationship. Mandeep, you're the chair of the audit committee at Sleep Country, and Madhu, you're on 2 audit committees, I believe. Tell us a little bit about your advice for building a really truly successful partnership with your audit chair. And where do you think that relationship is going? Is it becoming closer together? Is it still becoming more distant? I'd be just curious if you had any comments.
I'm enjoying having Madhu go first, so I'm going to ask you to do that again.
Again, I was going to say, Mandeep, why don't you go first on this one? Okay.
I'll build off of you. Go ahead.
All right. So thank you, Ross and Mandeep. So I am the chair of the audit committee at Akamai Technologies, and that's another $3.5 billion software company. And I'm a member of the audit committee at Bank of Montreal. I don't chair that. That's a very recent appointment for me. The audit committee chair role in the CFO will always remain very close. Right, and it has to be very, very close. It's one that's built on trust and a shared partnership on governance, right? So that's what I experienced before I started to get on boards from the audit committee chairs. I'm still very, very close. There was a question on Q&A about mentorship. I mean, the audit committee chairs were inevitably my best mentors, right? When I was not on board the companies. So I think it's very, very important. And I do think the partnership between audit committee chair and the CFO is also something the board leverages, right? And the board takes it for granted, as they should, rightly, about this partnership. So I can tell you how I do it at Akamai, for instance. It's a very transparent relationship with the CFO. It's almost, I'm not here to do your job, but I'm here to support you. I do your job during the daytime. I'm the most empathetic you're going to find and supportive, but also transcends to the team. So I have a little bit of a structure where I have 15-minute one-on-ones, or as needed, with internal audit lead, with a compliance lead, the chief accounting officer at Akamai, right? And try to kind of be that open with the CFO team and with audit partner, for instance, right? Really build a structure around it, but also strengthens that relationship. The rule of no surprises always applies in finance, and the audit committee chair and the CFO have this partnership on behalf of the board, the CEO and the management to continue that. But everything I said, it would lead to the right outcomes. Go ahead, Mandeep.
Yeah, I mean, just building on it, I would say it very much is a partnership. It's important to understand that when you're sitting on the audit committee, you're not management. And I'll admit there's sometimes this natural reaction to say, well, hold on a second, this is how I think we can do it. We got to resist that because our responsibility is stewardship and to make sure that we are a part of the broader board guiding where the organization, helping them achieve the goals that they've set out and that has been frankly approved. Developing that partnership goes to, developing a certain level of intimacy. And so building a relationship and a friendship. I have monthly one-on-ones with the CFO of Sleep Country. He's a wonderful guy. He has a very clear mandate on what he wants to accomplish, and I'm trying to help him and support him in doing that. But Madhu also touched on an important piece, which is as a member of the board is understanding that we have sometimes early insight into what's happening to the business. And so sometimes, an astute management team will take advantage of that to understand that they can use the audit chair as a sounding board on how to get things through to the rest of the board. And so you end up getting involved earlier on transactions and other types of one-off items, which is, I think, a win-win. So it's really about building that relationship and using it to your advantage and to their advantage.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of a mentor-coach type relationship there. I mean, not in every case, I'm sure, but it sounds like you're there when, to provide advice. Should you need anything. Is that fair to say, Madhu?
It's fair to say, and depending on the challenges of the evolution of the company, you'll find that mentor-coach relationship taking a higher share sometimes than a true partnership. It depends on the needs of the company. Many CFOs I know rely on that audit chair for several kinds of things. I've done it in the past. So it really depends on the needs of the company where that could be accentuated, or a strong CFO team, et cetera. It becomes more of a very governed and solid partnership.
Yeah, and I think that extends beyond the audit committee. It's to the board in general. A board wants the management team to succeed. The board joins the company because they believe in the mission of the company and they believe that the company can accomplish great things. And so the types of individuals who will typically join a public company board have accomplished quite a bit in their lives. And so, as putting my Celestica hat on now again as part of the management team, I'd be a fool to not try and tap into all of that. For these ex-CEOs and ex-CFOs and people on multiple boards, they've seen a lot of things. And so it works to my advantage to use them as a sounding board as best as I can.
That's interesting, because I guess if you're very comfortable with, you as a CFO, that's one thing. But if you're really brand new into the role, is there a fear I don't want to come across not knowing, or I should know the answer to this? Is that fair to say?
It's an evolution.
It is absolutely an evolution. And I think also the audit chair in that scenario would have the interest and responsibility to make it more comfortable for the CEO, for the CFO, right? And to help grow in that process for sure.
Very good. I'm going to turn over to some of the questions from our participants. And again, it probably builds off what we've just talked about, which is the role of mentors in your career. You're both obviously very established today, but do you have mentors today who have been your mentors in your career and really helped you sort of develop?
Yeah, so I was going to start here. I saw the question, it's a great one. So when you think about the funnel, at the bottom of the funnel, you're really going to end up with just a handful of individuals who have been with you in the journey, right? Time is the most expensive currency today, right? So I would say that I've always thought about mentorship, and I hope this resonates with the audience. Think about mentorship as situational mentorship. Every interaction, every situation is an opportunity to pick up something, right? And if that resonates with you, then operationalize it for yourself, right? It doesn't mean don't reach out to mentors, but I do think the reality is that you're going to end the funnel. You're going to have your journey with very, very few individuals that you have a consistent 10-year, 20-year, 30-year relationships. But I think it's so important in many cases, like mentorship is staring at us. We just have to stare at it and take it and learn from it. That's a little bit of a myth or a clarity I did want to provide, that when we really observe a particular meeting with a CEO, a particular interaction with a business person, a business leader, I think mentorship situations, mentorship interactions are there all the time. But yes, absolutely, if you can pick one or two mentors. The other thing I would say is mentor and mentee. When I was a mentee and I'm still a mentee, I'm always prepared with my mentor, right? If I want to call you, Ross, and you are my mentor, we speak every quarter, twice a year. I'm always prepared saying, what do I want from Ross? I probably tell you in advance saying, hey, here are the things I'm looking to brainstorm. Of course, anything else we can talk about, right? So I think as a mentee, you do have an obligation to be planned, to be prepared, and to take the initiative, all of that. And then it ends up a great relationship and lots to learn from.
Yeah, I'd say for myself, I don't have a formal mentors, but I always have had mentors, and I have mentors today. And almost always they've been outside of the function. They're typically CEOs or business partners or business unit leads that I work with, who I just naturally look to for guidance and advice. And it just naturally, and it's very organic and it evolves on its own. And that lasts for a period of time. And then sometimes we go to different areas and then I end up having other mentors. I am, though, a formal mentor to a few different individuals. And when I, play that role, my one thing that I just tell the mentee is, you own the agenda. I am available whenever you need me. You tell me when you want to get together. Sometimes we have a standing meeting, sometimes we don't, but that meeting is your meeting. And so you tell me how we are going to best use that time. And for those, I think, who get the most out of it, they have some very specific things that they want to cover off. And it's not pie in the sky conversations of what's it going to take one day to be successful. It's, hey, I'm dealing with this issue. I'm thinking about doing it this way, but what do you think? Would you suggest I go left or should I go right? That's a very interesting conversation to have with somebody when they're looking for, they already have thought through how they want to approach things, and now they're just looking for some additional guidance. Those are very interesting conversations.
When you moved into the CFO role for Celestica, did you look at that in that first 12 months and say, I really need to lean on this person, or how did you sort of approach that first year?
I've been very fortunate that I have a CEO that I work with who I have a wonderful relationship with and I respect considerably. And I knew that he wholeheartedly wanted me to succeed. And I was not worried about getting very tough feedback, but I took his guidance along the way. And he has been a CEO in other companies before. He has that experience. He's worked with many CFOs. And so I actually leaned on him quite a bit in terms of Celestica. Outside of Celestica, there were other individuals, though, who I had to use as a sounding board. Because like you said, Ross, at the very beginning, and it's just natural, you just want to make the right decisions. You don't know if you should know something, and you're sometimes second guessing yourself because how can I not know this? And then you go and you talk to someone else who's been there before, and they're like, no, nobody knows that the first time. This is how you do it. And sometimes you just need that confidence builder. So you need mentors inside and outside.
That's great. We've got time for maybe two more questions. First question is, should finance folks leave finance to a business role and then come back into finance? And if they do, what parts of the business make sense?
Yeah, I would say 100%. 100%. If you can afford to do it, if you're early on in your career, but do it in conjunction with your own personal roadmap, right? Taking a few years to go lead, say, revenue operations or other related, whatever you want to do. But if the ultimate path is to be the head of finance, is to be CFO, it not only will 100% help, but also make it as part of your longer term roadmap so that I'm going to do it for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and then here's how it's going to help. And have your pitch ready, right? Your pitch 5 years from now should be ready when you're trying to make the move. And then, of course, you're going to learn as much as you can. But I would say that would be such a valuable experience. And I personally, thank you for the question. I personally regret I didn't have an opportunity to do so.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I don't think you have to, but I think you will benefit considerably if you do. And if you are going to do it, what to me is experience that no one can ever take away from you is to own a P&L or own some portion of that P&L where you're actually interfacing with the customer, you're understanding what drives business, and you have accountability and responsibility to fulfill, the needs of your customer. You can do that in supply chain as well, to some extent, because you're interfacing with an external party. But if you can do it, it's amazing. But you don't have to do it because you can still get that experience to a lesser degree by partnering with the business in many other areas like we've talked about today. But absolutely, if you have the opportunity, I would jump at it.
Wonderful. We've got a number of questions. We're unfortunately run out of time because we had some very good questions. So apologies for not being able to get to all of them. But I did want to say a very big thank you to Mandeep and Madhu for sharing some very interesting insights and practical advice for our participants. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do so today. So thank you very, very much.
And thank you, Ross. And thank you, Mandeep. And thanks to the audience.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Yep,
Very
take care.
good. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.